book review on video. And this time I'm going to talk about The White Bone by the Canadian author Barbara Gowdy. This is the only book that I've read by her. She's gotten some awesome reviews. Not just for this book, but for other books that she's written. I haven't read any of them. But this book is an absolute masterpiece. I picked it up because it's about elephants that I love. But just as a writer, she has a very good command of language, visual language. She has some images. Of course, this is necessarily a very visual book because it's about animals and their place in nature, which is, you have to sort of paint with words a bit to make that come alive. And she does that very, very, very well. I'm interested in reading other books, books by her. I have never come across any. I haven't looked that hard either, but she doesn't seem to be very well known in my country, Norway. But I would be interested in reading more of her, and that is kind of my litmus test. When I finish a book by a new author, the big question is, if I found another book by this person, would I read that? If the answer is no, then yeah, that first book wasn't too good. But this, The White Bone, is absolutely brilliant. It takes place in Africa, and the main character is an elephant. All the characters are elephants. Her name is Mud, our heroine. When she is born, her mother dies. And that's basically a death sentence for her. The herd moves on, she can't keep up. But before she dies, another herd comes across her dead mother and herself. And in that herd, there is a female elephant who has very recently lost her own baby. So recently that she has milk and everything. And she adopts Mud. And she joins this new herd, becomes her family. Somewhere in East Africa, on the plains. And it's very difficult for them. They go through a lot of hard times. A big part of the book is set during a very difficult period because of drought, where they struggle tremendously to find water and food. And they come across, or come into contact with, unfortunately for them, what Gowdy calls hindleggers. In other words, us. And of course that doesn't end well for the elephants. So if you love elephants, as I do, you're going to find this a very, very, very difficult book to read. This is heartbreaking. This is just absolutely tragic in so many ways. There are beams of hope and happy things that happen, but overall, it's a brutal story. Which is right, because elephants right now, in Africa, in the wild, they are fighting for their life, as a species. And yeah, they're us. It's us they're fighting against. It's the hindleggers who are behind this. Specifically, the fucking Chinese. God. Don't get me started on that. I'm going to make a separate video about why you should not buy anything made out of ivory. But this is the whole thing with certain species, the elephants, the rhinos especially, being hunted now to the brink of extinction and probably beyond. It's due to the Chinese. Fuck you guys. But that aside, the Chinese are not characters in this book. The elephants don't care who the hindleggers are, where they come from, what they are, what they do. They just want to avoid them at all costs. Basically, the problem is that to escape from the hindleggers, there's almost nowhere left to go. And this does become a problem for Mud. If there is no water anywhere that you know, where can you go? What can you do? Mud believes that she knows the way. And yeah, does she find it? Read the book, find out. This book is told entirely from the viewpoint of the elephants. And, you know, they have lines, they have thoughts, everything, as if it was narrated by humans. Gowdy describes a culture, you know, humans have we're supposedly the only ones who have culture. But Gowdy describes a culture for this species that, to me, with what I know of elephants, seems extremely likely and convincing. And of course, a lot of people are going to say, well, this is anthropomorphizing, she's creating all this in her mind. Of course she is. But, as I said in another video, if you think that that's what she's doing and that what people who love elephants and rave about them, that we're just projecting our own fantasies, what we wish these animals to be, onto them, you should do some reading about the research that's been going on and what it has shown us in recent years, especially about the evolution of the brain of the elephant, which parallels the evolution of our own brains to a striking extent, and really does make it possible that there is a lot more to these creatures than what we perhaps would like to think. I do see the point. There is, maybe it's a bit much, and you might feel that she goes too far in all of this, creating their culture and in their communications and whatnot. But as you read it, you're not going to think about that, because this story it's a tragedy, but it is such a beautifully written tragedy. It is so engrossing. She just pulls you in, and while you read, you totally believe it. It's fantastically well written. It's very, very sad. It's deeply tragic story. And as an elephant lover, it's going to break your heart. You're going to want to put the book away because it's just too much. But if you're like me, you're not going to be able to, and you shouldn't, because even though Gowdy may go a bit too far in the thoughts and feelings that she recreates for these animals, the position she puts them in, that they are, as a species, being murdered. Not the individuals, or just the individuals, but as a species, they are being driven to their end by us. This is really happening to these animals. And I think that as those responsible, representatives of those responsible, we have a duty to look that in the eye. So I think everyone should actually read this book. I quite recently read a book about the Holocaust, a scholarly treatise on when the Holocaust became known to the Western world, where there are quotes from Jewish leaders in the 1940s during the war saying that they are murdering us as a people. These aren't pogroms. This is our extinction as a people. And that's what is happening to the elephants. They will hopefully never become completely extinct, or at least not for a very long time, because we will preserve them in our zoos and sanctuaries, where they will continue to live on our mercy, as best they may. But they have the right to their own lives the way they want to live them, and we are actively depriving them of that right. I think this is a book that everyone should read, and I know that in several zoos, this book is required reading for zookeepers who apply to become elephant keepers. There's a reading list, things you have to read, and this book is on that list, I know, in several places. It's an absolutely beautiful book. It's very thought-provoking. If you love elephants, you should absolutely read this book. If you just love animals and the natural world, you should also read it, because this is the current situation of elephants is a very vivid picture, if you will, of what we are doing to the planet, because there are so many other species that are in the same situation as the elephants, amphibians especially, but they're not as big and spectacular or famous. You know, everybody knows what an elephant is. But we're really doing this. Some of the tragedy in this book comes from natural causes, like, you know, there's a drought, which we are also capable of causing, of course, but this really is a struggle. It's a story from a battlefield in some ways. It's a horrendous book in some ways. It's going to break your heart, but it is so beautiful, wonderfully written, a fantastic story, a tour de force, someone has written here, compelling and always absorbing. And that is so true. And Alice Munro writes that it is absolutely compelling. Yes, it is. You're going to be pulled in even if you think the premise, a dramatic, tragic story told from the viewpoint of elephants, if you think the premise sounds ridiculous or silly, just read the book. And at least for the time when you're reading it, you're going to see that it is nothing of the kind. It's a beautiful, harrowing, compelling book. The White Bone by Barbara Gowdy. It broke my heart, but I loved it.